know you heard me on the radio, flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K. I know you heard me on the radio, flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K.
Rutgers Scarlet Knights fans, it's Larry K, the host of Night Watch. We have a big game this week with the old Big East rival, although I wouldn't call it a rival since they beat the crap out of us most times. But VaTech, we're playing them this Saturday, 3:30 kickoff, first road game, and I have somebody who's got a little more expertise in them than I do. From the Boundary Corner podcast, Brian Seigla has agreed to join the Night Watch today to discuss the game, discuss the strengths and weaknesses down there and what we could look for, and just to kind of give you guys an idea of what we're looking at and to preview the game. So, Brian, welcome to Night Watch. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Larry. How's it going this evening? I'm excited to talk a little bit of Hokies, maybe even get a little nuggets information on the Scarlet Knights there too.
Yes, sir. So, obviously, Blacksburg, awesome environment to play in, 3:30 kickoff. Let's just start with the basics. Hey, how do you feel about these old school games, regionally with Northeastern or Mid-Atlantic teams? It can be challenging sometimes because you're playing higher caliber teams than if you're playing a non-power 5 for us or you get one FCS game. But other than that, these can be challenging games for both teams, right? I mean, for you guys, when we play Syracuse, when we played Boston College in Boston, how do you feel about, rekindling some of those old games and making that a part of the schedules?
I like it to a point. We've already had a unfortunate game down at in Nashville that I was in the stands for. So it's never necessarily an easy game when you go on the road against a Power 4 opponent. So that's always something to take into account. Especially when you factor in, you talked about Syracuse, you got the dome there, and no one really wants to play there even in conference. So that's always one that you circle and schedule and be like, no, thank you. Mm-hmm. But I like it. So my actual first game live in Lane Stadium was when Rutgers came in 2002. Wow. So that kind of tells you how far back I go with that. That was a fun game. You had a bunch of guys that right in the the prime of the Virginia Tech ascendancy there. So it was really a fun game. You got Kevin Jones out there. You got Brian Randall. Some all-time Tech greats that were playing in that game. So it was really fun to get to experience that. So I think rekindling some of these matchups can be exciting because there is some of that blood there that still gets rolled a little bit, especially when you talk about Virginia Tech and West Virginia. You got Pitt and West Virginia still getting the backyard brawl. We just saw that this past weekend. So
I think earlier in the year,
Yeah, I think it's still important to have those type of old school rivalries from those regional teams that don't necessarily get to see each other every year anymore.
Makes sense. And plus, some of the recruiting battles and the recruiting areas that we're in sometimes overlap too, so to kind of have games where we can have a road trip, it's not a plane trip, I think is just good for college football. And I know a lot of people are making the trip down to Blacksburg for the game. And I know it's a great environment down there. Anytime I head down that way, it's just gorgeous. So I don't know how much of a contingency will be there, but I know there's a fair amount of people looking forward to that game. So it's just fun to get on the road and go to those games. Let me ask you about, you mentioned the game down south, and I don't know, do you consider yourself down south anymore?
You know what? It's kind of interesting. I mean, Virginia is kind of that, Mendoza line for lack of a better word. Like everyone says, Richmond is kind of the cutoff. I'm in the greater Richmond area, so I guess I can kind of put my foot in both camps a little bit there. But I grew up right on the North Carolina line in a small town, so from myself personally, I've always considered myself a Southerner, but it's definitely one of those things, especially when you live in Richmond. Like, okay, are you from the South? Or are you, no one considers Nova the South.
No, no more at all. No, it's not. I always say driving up, like if I'm driving up from Florida or the Carolinas, when you hit Nova, you're like, okay, I'm in the northeast of the country now, which is
exactly
kind of evolved to that. So that's why I asked. It was just kind of funny. So the season so far, though, for the Hokies, I mean, what were expectations? What are expectations? Have they changed at all? Are you on course? Did you consider that a big hiccup? Were there reasons for it? Just tell us a little bit about the season thus far and what you're expecting going forward.
Big picture, slow starts to the couple games there to start the season off, especially against Vanderbilt. Really didn't get any points on the board in the first half. Struggled to put some points on the board in the first half again against Marshall. Looking specifically at the Vanderbilt game, we just kind of got shell shocked out of the gate, and it took us a while to recover. I think we weren't anticipating the crispness that we saw the triple option in the shotgun ran out the gate from that offense. And we kind of were on our heels a little bit. I think we had our cornerbacks peeking in the backfield a little bit, trying to help with run support, and that hurt us on some key third down passes. So there's a lot of factors in there that really kind of contributed to us not really being able to execute in the way that we wanted to. I feel like we've gotten a little bit better over the coming days and weeks. I'm seeing some steady progress forward for this team. I liked every quarter but the second one against ODU. I think we went out there and played pretty well overall in all phases against ODU. Still have everything that we wanted, I think, in play in terms of conference championship potential. All that is still in play. I think the only thing that we really lost in week one was any chance of getting any sort of at-large bid in the college football playoff.
Right.
So at this point, it's do what you need to do in the conference, get to the conference championship, go in there and make some additional noise. But I think that the conference is still wide open for us. I've liked the way we've kind of progressed week to week, but I would like to see us get a little bit better in the first half, especially offensively.
And tell us about offensively. I mean, for those who don't know, offensive philosophy in general. When is it successful? When is it going to struggle? What do you rely on primarily? I know you have a quarterback who can get out and cause some issues for people, big playability. But in general, what needs to be clicking for the Hokies to be doing really well on offense? And it seemed like they progressed last year, from early on, some jitters, to being really a good team, towards the end of that year. And I think a lot of people expected that to continue this year, and it's early, so that could be continuing, obviously, with the last couple weeks. What should Rutgers fans be looking for, in terms of your offensive philosophy and how they like to attack?
Yeah, just from a scheme perspective, we're kind of a smash mouth spread. We've got some RPO elements that we'll throw in there as well. So you're going to expect a heavy dose of the run. You're going to expect those RPOs, and then you're going to expect some shots down the field that are set up off a lot of those other actions that we kind of set up in the first and second quarters there. We definitely have to kind of go through the quarterback. If you look at the stats against ODU, Kyron Drones, 12 carries, 117 yards, nearly 10 yards a carry. You got a touchdown there. Probably half of those yards are off one big run. Had a big stiff arm, and then he trucked a guy. So he's a guy that will play physically in the running game, not just a guy that's going to run away from you. We've got a running back, Bayshaw Tuden. He is the truth. He is elusive. He has good vision. He runs through arm tackles very well. And then we've got a staple of wide receivers that honestly we can't get them enough balls at this point. You got Ollie Jennings on the outside, transferred in from ODU last year, was injured against Purdue. He's back this year for a super senior year. Jalen Lane has probably been the most successful looking at last year and into this year. Had over 100 yards against ODU and a touchdown. Really, really good player in the slot. Can do a lot of different things. And then you got a guy like Steven Gosnell that, you call him a possession receiver, but if you saw some of the highlights, I mean, that kid lays out, can make some of those difficult catches. Very Danny Cole-esque in terms of his skill set. If you remember from the early 2010s Virginia Tech Hokies, very Danny Cole-esque in terms of his skill set there. And then another guy, we got Daquan Felton on the outside, very big physical wide receiver, but he can run by you as well.
So you got a physical team that'll spread you out and also be elusive, and it's going to cause obviously matchup problems because you got a quarterback who can run physically, but also put yards on the stat sheet, and he can throw the ball. Um, and that's going to be interesting to see. I don't know that we've really in the first 2 weeks played a team quite like that. I mean, Scroggins from Howard obviously can get out of the pocket and run around a little bit. But when you're running a run pass option and you're run heavy and then your quarterback take off, but you also have all those wideouts, that's a high powered offense. Defensively, what is it that Rutgers has to get through here? Obviously, we're a power running team in a lot of ways. We like to run up the middle, rack up the yards between the tackles, even between the guards, and then go for those big shots when it opens up. But how's the defense looking this year so far, and how's it looking going into the game this Saturday?
We've improved, I think, the last 2 weeks against Marshall and ODU. I think like I said earlier, the Vanderbilt game was very much not something that I liked watching. The defense kind of looked lost. There was a lot of responsibility problems, especially on the edge in the rushing attack there. We really did not have an answer for their running quarterback, especially when he got to the edge. We've been a little bit better in the middle. I think if you're looking at strengths, defensive line and cornerback are going to be our biggest strengths. We've got a couple transfers in there, Aeneas Peebles in particular. You got Kamari Copeland. You got a guy like Kelvin Gilliam. These guys have come in and kind of already added to a defensive line that included Antoine Powell-Ryland, who had 10 sacks last year, had 4 alone last week against ODU. So the defensive line we feel really good about. Cornerbacks, you got probably arguably the best cornerback in the ACC in Dorian Strong. You pair him with Mansour Delane, who struggled against Vanderbilt, but has been significantly improved the last 2 weeks. I think only 2 catches, surrendered, 2 interceptions. So he's a guy that really kind of turned around. And I think that was who I was referencing primarily was looking a little too much in run support week 1 and kind of got burned a few times and has really kind of turned it around since then. But the biggest question mark for the Hokies defense is that linebacker and safety unit. We're very young and inexperienced in the safety area, and I think linebacker we're still kind of figuring out who the guys are at the various positions. We know Sam Brumfield is kind of locked in at middle linebacker. We've had a lot of rotation at that will position, and that's where we've kind of had the most struggles is the will position and that kind of the communication between that will position and the supporting safety in run support there.
Okay, that makes sense. Now you're confident in the defensive line, and linebacker has some potential issues. So has the defensive line done a good job of setting, the tone at the line of scrimmage and stopping the run there, or have there been some lapses there? And then conversely on passing downs, how are they getting after the quarterback with those front 4? And then how much do they have to bring pressure to get after the quarterback, and does that leave them open, with the linebacker cores and those safeties? How has that gone so far?
Yeah, I mean, this is a defense that really likes to play man, rush 4. They usually get home because we do have some guys out on the edge that are very good at rushing the passer. We would prefer to do that and let the linebackers kind of just react, make the tackles if they need to. I think where we get into some problems is when we aren't good on first and second down. And that kind of plays away from us being able to just rush 4, play those man responsibilities, lean on the skill sets that are best on that defense. And again, we have given up some big plays in the running game, and that's probably the biggest concern that I think we have going into this year. Looking back at last year's game with Rutgers, I think Manangai is a deadly weapon in the run game. He torched us pretty good last year. I think we're improved in the middle this year compared to last year, but it's still going to be a problem. We have given up a couple big runs. Vanderbilt was less of a big run situation and more of a death by 1,000 cuts. We did give up 1 big run against Marshall and 1 big run against ODU, both of them from the quarterbacks.
So they were quarterback runs, and then triple option is obviously always gonna. I remember we would play Army, and we would play these teams back in the day with Rutgers all the time, and it's always like a shell shock early in the game because that offense can be quite a weapon just because people don't see it very much, and you don't know where the run is coming from. Um, have those big runs? I mean, you said they were two of them are from the quarterbacks in recent weeks. I mean, have they primarily been between the tackle type runs into that defensive line, maybe getting past that first level of talented players and getting into that linebacker core, or have they been something where over pursuit on the edge, have been outside runs? I mean, anything to that effect?
Yeah, it's mostly been the over pursuit. We've seen both of the long touchdowns have come with over pursuit into the spill area.
Mhm.
Safeties ducking their head in there too quick. Will over pursuing. Those type of things have been the biggest bugaboo for the defense so far. So run fits, especially on the edge there. If we can get those kind of ironed out, I think we'll feel pretty good about the defense going forward, because it's really just the big plays in the running game that have been killing us the last couple weeks.
And so then obviously pass defense, when you talk about the fact that you have guys in the front four that can get after the passer, you have linebackers that could stay, back a little bit with leverage to keep an eye on people, and you have talented corners who obviously probably prevent separation. You're pretty confident in that pass defense, I'd guess, especially in downs where it's going to be a pass.
Yeah, we feel pretty confident when we get into those situations, those third and long situations where we can rush four, maybe bring an extra, blitzer here and there, and just kind of play that man. Man is going to lead to sacks, and sacks lead to interceptions, so they kind of feed each other.
I think it's interesting too, because just to kind of talk about our game, some of the things I've noticed early on with Rutgers is that Ethan Kaliakmanis, transfer from Minnesota, has been fairly accurate with the football, but this was against Howard and then Akron. And one thing I've noticed is that in the second game, first half especially, he kind of can try to squeeze the ball in there. Sometimes he can kind of squeeze it in when there's coverage. And our receivers, Dymere Miller, some talented guys, but there's been instances where they've struggled a bit with separation. And so obviously our bread and butter is this run game. And it's going to be interesting to see the chess match, I think. How successful can Rutgers be on early downs, or unsuccessful? Can the Hokies make them on early downs, forcing them into these pass situations on third and long? And how can that affect how the game goes? Because I think if Rutgers is forced into longer down and distances, it could really play into your hands. And on the other hand, if Rutgers can establish that run early and be on third and shorts, it might have them on their heels a little bit. And that's just after talking to you right now. So I think that's an interesting matchup there. Let's talk about the other side of the ball. Rutgers has a talented safety core. They have an interesting defense, where they kind of have almost it's two linebackers with like a safety who's a quasi linebacker safety. We're gonna see if one of our edges, Bailey, is back. Very talented. We've struggled a bit to get pressure on the quarterback without him. And we'll see if Tyreen Powell is back, the linebacker, very talented last year for us. And I would say, when you have a guy who can run horizontally as good as him, he does a little better on spying speedy quarterbacks. But when he's out, you have Jabome, you have Moses Walker, some of these other guys stepping up at linebacker. Obviously, Mohamed Toure, maybe our best defensive player from last year, is out for the season, and he was the sack leader. So it's going to be interesting to see how Rutgers can try to contain a quarterback who can run the ball as well as drones. The spread's always been an interesting thing to defend for Shiano defenses for some reason. So I'm curious to see how it's going to go. Where have they found? I know you kind of already talked about it a lot, but what do they want to do? You say they want to run the ball. They want to run the ball early and often, and they want to do it physically. And against a team like Rutgers, I guess, is it the philosophy primarily, hey, set the tone with the run game, try to go for the big play here and there, and if nothing's open, the quarterback runs, or are we seeing a lot of designed runs from the quarterback position?
It's been a mixed bag as far as design versus scramble or reads. We will run, quarterback power, things like that pretty regularly with Kyron. We'll run, naked boots. We'll run, speed sweeps with him. So we'll kind of mix up the design runs in there, but there's also going to be some where he's truly reading, can choose to take off on his own there. And obviously passing situations, he can always scramble a little bit as well. So there's going to be a mixed bag there. It kind of begins and ends with how well our offensive line played. I think overall we've had decent play from them from a rushing standpoint, especially looking at Marshall and ODU. I don't feel so great about our pass pro, especially in 5 or 7 step drop situations. I think we manage a lot better when we can get the quarterback moving, change those launch points, and be able to kind of split the defense a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be a team, especially considering we might be down a tackle heading to this game with Xavier Chaplin getting a little banged up last week. Pretty much was out the majority of the ODU game. Not sure is his availability at this point for Saturday. So concerned about pass pro. I think the running game is going to kind of depend a little bit on how quickly Kyron gets going on his rushes, because that kind of sets up what Tootin is able to do from a running back position.
That makes a lot of sense. So obviously that's the kind of key. I'm trying to figure out the matchups here, and that makes sense too. I mean, how much of our pass rush can be effective, especially if you have a banged up tackle and you're most worried about pass pro. When our pass rush, I don't think has been at the level that a lot of Rutgers fans would love for it to be. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. And I mean, obviously, if he's dropping back and he can get out of trouble, it's going to be on that first guy to either bring him down or to try to have somebody spying there who can close quickly. Because the other thing is, and we both know this, and when you're rooting for the team on offense, it's great. And when you're rooting for the defensive team, it's infuriating when a quarterback gets in trouble, scrambles, and then there's always going to be a wide out open. There's always going to be somebody down the field. So it seems to me, just in kind of doing some research on the Hokies, talking to you now, that, I mean, Rutgers really has to be wary of that big playability when he kind of puts the game on his shoulders, gets out of trouble. You got talented receivers, finds a way down the field. Now, obviously, they want to set the tone with running and things like that, but that big play has been a little bit of an Achilles heel. Even in the early going for Rutgers, we've kind of won handily, but these something to watch for was we've had big plays, made on that defense. And so now you're going up against a much better opponent than anything we've seen this year. And now you're going to have the ability for big plays and a lot of momentum because of that environment. And I want to kind of zoom out a little bit now and just talk about the environment. And what do you expect there? 3:30. What do you expect for the environment, the noise, the crowd, the tailgate scene, all of those things?
Yeah, it should be loud as always in Lane Stadium. This I think is from an out of conference standpoint. I think a lot of folks from an away game were traveling down to Nashville. We kind of took over Nashville, but I think this was the out of conference game that the Hokie fans had circled. Solid opponent, P4 matchup, similar pedigrees overall in terms of more of a physical team up front. So I think you're going to see a lot of Hokie faithful out there. You're going to see the student section crammed to the gills there. And I think it's going to be a very loud environment. And I hope that we are able to sustain that by getting a quick start against the Scarlet Knights.
Yeah, and you guys travel really well too. I mean, last year you guys were up here and it was a lot of fun. I'm sure Nashville was a lot of fun. So it's always cool to see fan bases that travel well and get out there. And I know it's home now, so you're going to be even louder and pack it out and everything else. I as a Rutgers fan, that's what I kind of, for a team that likes to play a lot of ball control, run the ball, keep everything in front of you, play, on an even keel and protect the ball. I think the thing Rutgers fans would probably fear most is going into a hostile environment and a big play happening, against the Knights, or, a turnover, which could really ignite the crowd and then get them off their kilter a little bit. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And Rutgers is obviously going to want to go in there, I think, and ho-hum, pound the ball a couple yards. Maybe they will take a shot. They have some Chris Long and Miller, these faster receivers. They'll take a shot, but that's kind of what they'll try to set up for every now and then. Although who knows, maybe they'll try something to surprise everybody. But I think that's going to be the war too, right? How hyped and momentous can we make this with a home crowd that's aching for it, and how much can Rutgers try to just keep it lunch pail and attacking the middle of the defense? I think it's going to be really interesting in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've been trying to do a lot of, is that I think for a while, the biggest complaint, especially during the Fuente era, is that, well, we've got this great entrance and we've got a loud crowd, but it doesn't matter by quarter two because we're down, and the other team is enjoying the hype of that moment just as much as we are because we're not out there putting it to teams like we used to at home. I think we're seeing some of the resurgence of Lane being a tough place to play again. So I think we're starting to earn that moniker of best entrance because we're actually putting a product out there that we're proud of for the 4 quarters after that.
And let me take me through that a little bit, because I've been in and out, with the focus in on it, the journey for you guys, because obviously with us we had our fun, and then we were okay when we entered the Big Ten, and then we were down and absolutely out for like a decade, and now we're kind of back, to. And it's the same thing with us with trying to reestablish that home field advantage, even as far as like getting a vehement chant and everything. But talk a little bit, just because it's college football show. And by the way, College Huddle guys, I didn't mention that before. I mean, we're colleagues on that. And we try to just, talk college football. The environment and the culture for me is just as important as the product on the field a lot of times. And I think I'm just genuinely curious. Take me through the journey of the last decade or so. Obviously a storied program, a very proud history, and then this recent resurgence. Just tell us a little bit about how that's been, how it was when there were some struggles, and how it's been with a resurgence, and where do you expect it to go?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, kind of that 2009, 2010 was really the turning point, I think, for Virginia Tech in terms of being a power and kind of what we became for most of the 2010s there. I think at the end of the Frank Beamer era, we didn't make the necessary adjustments from an infrastructure standpoint to be able to recruit and have that infrastructure behind the scenes that we needed to be competitive against the rest of the conference and obviously against any of the blue blood programs. That kind of came to a head at the change in guard there when Beamer stepped down. Fuente came on board. I think he did a good job of bringing in some recruits that fit what he wanted to do early.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did a good job of getting some more out of the offensive talent that was already on the current roster that Beamer had recruited.
Mm-hmm.
But then we started to see the wheels fall off once he had to build the roster himself. Roster management was abysmal. And in the meantime, a lack of emphasis on recruiting the state of Virginia came aboard. And that was really the thing that kind of eventually led, I think the biggest thing that led to Fuente's firing, other than just inconsistent game days,
Mm-hmm.
was the fact that we were not recruiting the state of Virginia anymore. I mean, it wasn't just the blue bloods coming down here and taking, the top 10 recruits. We were losing out to, the Wake Forest of the world, like on key recruits. So like at some point when an in-state, when a in-conference team like Wake Forest that's less than 2 hours from your campus, that for all intents and purposes should be able to take a recruit from you as a football school, that's when you start taking some notice and be like, what are we doing here? What in fact are we doing from a recruiting standpoint that is not resonating with these kids? So ultimately, door was shown. You get Brent Pry in. He had some ties being a GA back in the 90s when Virginia Tech first started to kind of rise to that football power status there. I feel like it was very much a culture hire, and it's really resonated, I think, with a lot of the fan base, a lot of the former players. It feels like we're getting our identity back a little bit.
Right.
I think the concern overall with the fan base with the current regime is more of the inexperience at some key spots, right? So this is Brent Pry's first head coaching gig.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a first-time defensive coordinator and a first-time Power 5 offensive coordinator.
Okay.
So those are pieces that we're still kind of working through, and I think that if those pieces can start to come together, that's when I think we'll feel confident going forward. But there's still some inconsistencies that we're seeing that we saw last year. We thought were kind of resolved a little bit as we went further into the season in 2023, but we felt like we kind of took a couple steps back to start 2024, and we're kind of building back those gains.
And do you think now the inconsistencies, when you say that, do you mean like, is it in game planning, in-game adjustments, in the play of certain guys that you thought had fully developed and maybe weren't where you thought they'd be as players? I mean, what do you mean by those inconsistencies?
I think it's a little of all of that. I think the bigger problem that I have is some of the game plan strategies and how slow we are sometimes to make those adjustments. I think we sometimes are a little bit more in the first half. We do what we do and we'll adjust at halftime instead
Yep.
of making those adjustments on the fly to try to stop the bleeding. That was the biggest frustration, I think, watching a game like Vanderbilt, was that we kept saying the same thing over and over and over again, both on offense and on defense. And we're like, all right, we got to do something different. We can't keep rolling the same thing out there and expect different results. And, those halftime adjustments were actually pretty good against Vanderbilt. You went out, you scored a good amount of points. You had over 320 yards in the second half. You only allowed in regulation, I think, one other touchdown in the second half. So it was a good showing for the adjustments, but how slow we got there and the initial game plan left a lot to be desired. So it's a preparation thing. It's also a slow adjustment thing. It's also, you'd like to see maybe a couple key guys have taken a little bit of a bigger step this offseason than they have. So it's kind of a little bit of everything, but I think the game planning to start the game has kind of been the most disappointing factor.
And then so culture, and I know at Rutgers, and I'd imagine a lot of places, but culture is so intrinsically linked to recruiting prowess, to fan excitement. I mean, in Rutgers, it's very important to understand New Jersey, the culture, the expectations. The fan base is dedicated and has a lot of some diehards, but then, with respect to big universities, probably not as large as some of the blue bloods, but a lot of casuals that can come in and be cultural, get excited about it if it's going the right way, but also in recruiting, right? I mean, recruiting New Jersey, and then we've steadily kind of expanded that with being in the Big Ten to the Midwest. Obviously, we go as best we can down to Maryland, Virginia, that area, and that's fertile recruiting territory. How much has culture, because you mentioned it, played into the turnaround, and how is recruiting going in your immediate region as opposed to a few years ago when things were tough?
Yeah, the relationship building in the state is night and day from where it was 3-4 years ago, and I think that's the biggest thing that we've seen from a recruit improvement. We've been able to consistently get 2 to 3 guys in the Virginia top 10 pretty much every year except for year one since Brent Pry's been on board, and that's including a Clemson and a Penn State dipping their toes in there from time to time. Occasionally we'll get a Clemson, Florida State. So these teams are still reaching up and trying to get the talent in Virginia, but we've had a little bit more consistency with being able to still grab some of that top talent, especially looking at the receiver position. Fontel Mines has been a recruiting legend right now. He's been going into Richmond in the 757 and basically handpicking the guys that he wants to be on that wide receiver core. So that's been a big thing for us. And I think, looking at the culture of Virginia Tech in general, it's really been blue collar, but it's also been about swagger. It's always been about an attitude on defense. So it has been the blue collar, just go to work, do your job, be tough in the trenches, but we've always had a little bit of swagger with the way we played, especially on defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're getting some of that identity back. You look at runs from even on offense, look at Kyron Drones. He runs through guys. He's stiff arming guys. He's flexing on them a little bit at the end there. So he's a guy that plays with that attitude and that swag, while still, it being a focus on, doing your job and taking care of your brother out there.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, you get that attitude in a school like that. You should be getting, a couple of the top guys from the state, every year, just because of the history and how it is, and then the vibe. And I do think of swag when I think of the school. So that makes sense for sure. And I also think that's kind of why I still like that mid-Atlantic to Northeastern football. It's a little bit different in some ways than some of the Midwestern and stuff. And I don't know. It's an interesting thing. And I think as the conferences meld and the rivalries evolve and things change, you lose some of that, but then you maintain some of it just in style of play and recruiting grounds and things. And it's interesting to kind of take a look at in that way. So look, let's get to brass tacks. We're nearing the end of the show here. I've learned a lot. I think the listeners have learned a lot, and I'm particularly intrigued by the matchups and the game plans, because I think there's an interesting way that Rutgers is going to try to attack, and you guys are going to try to attack. based on strengths and weaknesses. And I think this isn't really a strength versus strength, weakness versus weakness team. This is kind of like a mixed bag of like who's going to try to do what works best for them and are they going to succeed? And if not, it's going to look really good for the other team. What are your expectations for Saturday? What's your prediction for Saturday? And, how are you feeling about it one way or the other? And then depending on what happens, does that influence your outlook for the rest of the season at all? Positively or negatively?
I'd say on the taking the latter first here, I think it could really go either way. I feel like no one's going to feel very good starting conference play 2-2.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of folks in the fan base had looked at out of conference schedule and said that's 4-0
Mm-hmm.
going into Miami, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that would be a little bit of a damper from that standpoint. But again, like I said earlier, everything that you want for the season, big picture, is still on the table, regardless of how this outcome goes. So I'm not really certain on which way I lean that way. I would definitely be disappointed in a loss. I think I'm expecting kind of a little bit of a slugfest, just heavy rushing attack from both teams. I'm expecting not necessarily a low scoring game, but I think maybe a little bit lower than both teams have seen so far on the offensive side.
Yeah.
I'm looking at could come down to a field goal, like a 27-24 Hokie victory here is what I'm predicting.
Yeah, I have it in that 20-something range is where I think it's going to be. And I remember I did predict a win for Rutgers early in the year just because I was just going through it and I'm like, okay, what happened last year? Can we line up helmet on helmet and run the football? But I think Rutgers season, and this is a lot of their schedule, there are games they can win, but games that if they lose, it's also expected, right? I mean, this is on the road. I think most people who were intelligent looking at this going into the season thought this was going to be a tough game for Rutgers. I mean, it's
Yeah,
on the road. The Hokies are a good team, and it's a home environment. They looked, as last year progressed, and you kind of alluded to it before, mastered their craft and continued to improve. So we're a long way from last season, which also was a home game for Rutgers. If I didn't put a score on it, I mean, seeing how the season's gone so far, I've kind of seen. I expected Virginia Tech to be 3-0 coming into this game. So does it change it a little bit? The Vandy game initially, I think if you're a Rutgers fan, you're sitting there like, oh, I mean, I don't know, maybe we're still, this is a tough game, So I guess I'll give my prediction on your show. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way. I think it would be a field goal game too. I think we could pull it out if we run the ball and set the tone the way we want. But if there is a turnover coupled with big plays, I just don't think Rutgers can't survive a turnover or two coupled with big plays on the other side. And then in that case, the game would get away from them. So I'm kind of curious to see how it starts off after kickoff to see how the game's going to go. I don't think a loss for Rutgers would be crippling for our season projection because it's a game that, by all intents and purposes, you can, and some might say should lose. You're on the road against a good team. It's your first road game. And now you
yeah.
come back for a Friday night game against Washington. Like you said, everything's still in front of them at that point. You have the other two out of conference wins that were expected, and now you go into probably the lightest Big Ten schedule we've had in years because we're not in the Big Ten East anymore. Don't have to play Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, but still challenging. So I'm looking forward to the game because I think whereas you guys have had some tests already, or at least one, serious test to start the season as well. Rutgers really hasn't been tested to that extent. I mean, the schedule thus far and then the bye week. I don't know. I don't quite really know. I
Yeah.
can pick out stats. I can look at style of play and I can look at last year, but I don't have a litmus test to really say what happened. And then, talking about Vandy and you're talking about triple option, like, do I really have a litmus test of any kind on Virginia Tech? Like, and I don't think I do. So I think this is going to tell a lot of stories, this game, just in terms of where we even are and what kind of team we're going to be. It's the first true test of the season. I mean, and it's either going to be you get knocked down, you got to get yourself back up quick for a Friday night game against Washington and hit the Big Ten schedule, or you pull one out and you're feeling pretty confident, but you still don't get on an emotional high because you go away. And so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it a lot. I'll be tuning in, and I think it'll be fun either way, and it'll tell us a lot about both teams either way. And hopefully, I'll send you a text after the game, no matter what happens, and we'll talk about whatever. We were wrong, we were right.
Exactly.
Who knows?
Yeah, and you kind of feel the same way I do as far as that upcoming schedule, because we've got this game, which, like I said, we looked at the schedule and said, okay, it's a Greg Schiano team. We're going to get 4 quarters of hell regardless of what the outcome is. We got a trip down to Miami on a Friday on a short week, and then we're going out west to Stanford. So this was kind of the little run of games that we had circled. Like, all right, if we can get out of this 2-1,
You guys have a tough travel schedule and like a legit.
In that little section, it's pretty rough. After that, it gets a little bit more smooth sailing. But that little at 3-game stretch there was a rough one to look at when it came out. And I'm like, if we can get out of that 2-1, I'll feel really good. And I'm hoping we get out there, 3-0, and we can upset somebody down there in Miami, because that's really the team that's the only team, in my opinion, that's really looked consistent in the ACC has been that Miami team.
What do you think about Syracuse so far? Because I know Fran Brown, the former Rutgers assistant, was up there. I haven't followed them religiously, but they've looked the first 2 weeks looked all right. But
yeah, they look good. Again, one of those big wins was in the dome, so I still don't know what to take of that yet. I mean, I need more sample size at this point, and I'm with you on sample size, because you guys have played a couple teams that haven't really been what you would call a test, and we had that weird game to start out against Vandy. We're seeing some progress. We probably got a little bit better data to work on than you guys do, but we're still probably not as excited about the data we do have. So that's kind of where we are at this point.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, I think this stretch, we had the bye week, we got lucky, but then it was, it was this game, then it was Washington, and then it's, away at Nebraska and Wisconsin. Similar, to you guys. It's a tough little patch there. And some of the other Big Ten teams that we thought might be more cakewalks later in the season, your Illinois, your Minnesota, have, I think, looked a little better than some expected. So now it's like you really got to get through this stretch and come out respectably, because it's a tough stretch. And I know a lot of Rutgers fans like, oh, you get back Friday for Washington, and they haven't looked great. I'm like, yeah, but they're still I know they lost a lot of players. They were the runner-up. I mean, it's not just an easy cakewalk there. This is where Rutgers' schedule gets real. And if Rutgers wants to have a legitimately memorable season, you got to either get a W or come out with a respectable loss. You can't let the game get away from you with big plays and with turnovers. So I think that might tell some of the story of the game one way or another. But Brian, before you go, tell the people where they can find you. This was an awesome conversation. I've listened to you guys kind of in preparation for our show and to get a little bit of information on Virginia Tech, but let them know where they could find you. Let them know, go subscribe to his podcast, because I don't know why. This is just a weird tidbit, just for your information. I'll probably do it to you guys now. I don't know why, but when we played Boston College, I went to Boston for the game 2 years or 3 years ago, and I listened to like the Locked On Boston College podcast before the game to just get some info. And for some reason now it's on like my queue of subscribe. So now I like randomly follow Boston College just because I like the podcast. So subscribe to Brian. Hopefully when I go on, you guys subscribe to me. It's just fun to follow college football and to be around another fan base. So let the people know where they could find you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about Boston College. I say Boston College and FSU, in terms of fan bases, are the 2 fan bases that will jump on our show more often than not and just run our numbers through the roof whenever it's game week for them. So kudos to Boston College. FSU, I'm sorry you guys are 0-3, but my former coach Ryan Silverfield went down there and took care of business. But yeah, so you can find us. We're at Boundary Corner on Twitter, on X. You can find us on boundarycornervt.com. That's all of our links. You can subscribe there on YouTube. All of our links to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards is there. We got a great article coming out from Miranda Wilhelm, our contributing writer, later today. We're going live tonight on YouTube, on X, on Facebook. Check us out there. I just want to say big thank you, Larry, for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure having you on as well. And if there's other college football general talk or whatever I might put together later in the year, I'll definitely send the word out to you and get you back on, because this was very informative, Awesome conversation. So I really appreciate your efforts in coming up here and giving the people some information that I think a lot of people might not have had. And let's see what happens on Saturday, and good luck for the rest of the season, Brian.
Yeah, good luck to you, and we'll see how it goes.
Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
it.